Eliza Thornberry's initial moments at Hawthorne High were anticipated to dissolve into the mundane tapestry of a typical school day. With an unassuming gait, she wove through the throngs of bustling students, her presence as fleeting as a shadow in the dusk. Her hair, dark as the midnight realm, cascaded down her back, offering her solace in its anonymity. The school itself was a monolith of history, its facade an intricate composition of time-worn bricks ensnared by tendrils of persistent ivy. Its tall, arched windows mirrored the bleak sky, lending a spectral pallor to the classrooms that seemed to watch the students with an unblinking gaze. The corridors, lined with antiquated lockers that bore the scratches and dents of generations, absorbed the laughter and chatter, only to muffle it against their stony embrace. Eliza couldn't help but feel the weight of a hidden narrative pressing against her as she moved through these dimly lit passageways. It was as if the very walls were steeped in an ancient melancholy, a silent witness to years of adolescent conquests and defeats. It wasn't long before Eliza overheard fragments of whispered conversations, each one tinged with a mixture of fear and intrigue. They spoke of an unsolved mystery that seemed to cling to the school's reputation, the enigmatic demise of a student whose spirit, some claimed, still wandered the deserted halls. This tragic lore was woven so deeply into the fabric of Hawthorne High's culture that even the newest of students could sense the palpable change in atmosphere when passing by the old science wing. Once a hub of learning and discovery, the wing now stood as a forsaken mausoleum, its doors sealed with chains and padlocks, as if to contain a truth too horrid to let loose. The closer Eliza got to the derelict wing, the colder the air seemed to become, as though the very temperature were a reluctant guardian of the secrets held within. Occasionally, she would catch someone casting a nervous glance towards the heavy, bolted doors, or abruptly change direction to avoid walking too close to its silent, brooding presence. Despite the warmth of the crowded school, a chill crept up Eliza's spine as she continued her day, unable to shake the eerie feeling that Hawthorne High was more than just a school. It was a crypt where the past was not resting in peace, but rather lying in wait. As the bell heralded the end of another period, Eliza sought refuge in the school's library, a labyrinth of high oak shelves that groaned under the weight of countless tomes. The air was thick with the scent of aging paper and forgotten tales. She ran her fingers along the spines of books, their titles embossed in faded gold, leaving trails in the dust that seemed undisturbed for decades. The library was dim, with only a few rays of light piercing through the stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the worn carpet. In a secluded corner, where the silence was so profound it almost hummed, Eliza's gaze was drawn to a flickering anomaly. It was there, between the shadows and the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light, that she beheld the spectral figure of a young boy. His apparition was intermittent, shimmering in and out of existence, as if he were battling to remain in the realm of the visible. "Help me," he implored, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet it resonated through the stillness, ensnaring Eliza's attention completely. The phantom boy was dressed in the school's uniform, but it was ragged and charred at the edges, as though he had been caught in some terrible unspoken calamity. His eyes, once probably a vibrant testament to youth, now mirrored a depth of sorrow that no living being should possess. They were a window to the lost hopes and dreams of someone taken too soon. Introducing himself as Aiden, his words spilled forth like a mournful stream, telling Eliza of a life cut tragically short within the very walls that surrounded them. He spoke of secrets and lies, of a truth so devastating that it had been concealed beneath layers of silence and denial. Aiden's untimely demise, it seemed, was intertwined with the school's darkest chapter, a chapter that had been expunged from the official annals but was etched indelibly in the ether of the school's history. His ethereal hand reached out, fingers trembling in desperation, as he beseeched Eliza to delve into the murky past of Hawthorne High. "Find the truth, bring me peace," he implored, his voice cracking with the burden of his unfinished business. His spectral eyes pleaded with a fervency that transcended the grave, compelling Eliza to embark on a journey that would lead her through the cobwebbed corridors of history to unearth what had been so meticulously buried by time and fear. In the dim glow of the library's antique lamps, Eliza delved into the brittle pages of Hawthorne High's past, searching for the fragment of history that contained Aiden's legacy. The yearbooks were a patchwork of faces frozen in time, each a story suspended in a moment of adolescent triumph or uncertainty. As Eliza turned the pages, the faces blurred, all except for one that seemed to call out to her. It was Aiden's yearbook photo. His youthful grin was disarming, yet behind his eyes lay an ocean of untold narratives. He was captured in black and white, but Eliza could imagine the life that once colored his existence, a life brimming with the vibrant hues of promise and future dreams. With each night that passed, Eliza found herself sinking deeper into Aiden's world. Her dreams became vivid reenactments of Aiden's memories, flashes of his life, his joys, his fears, and finally his last fateful day. These visions painted a chillingly detailed picture, drawing Eliza further into the mystery that shrouded the school's sealed wing. The old science building, now just a hollow echo of its former self, seemed to be a vault guarding its secrets with an almost sentient resolve. The silence of this abandoned wing was oppressive, a stark contrast to the lively bustle that filled the rest of the school. It was as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting. Dust-laden lab benches and overturned stools were strewn about, a tableau of the hurried evacuation that took place on the day of the tragedy. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of chemicals now long dissipated, and the metallic tang of fear that seemed almost tangible. Eliza's steps were tentative, reverberating through the empty halls and classrooms that once were animated with Aiden's laughter and the everyday cacophony of a high school in session. This derelict wing, with its peeling paint and cobwebbed corners, stood as a mausoleum to Aiden's last moments. Each creaking door, each shadow cast by the flickering light of Eliza's flashlight, seemed to whisper secrets of the day when Aiden's bright future was snuffed out as quickly and unexpectedly as a gust of wind extinguishes a candle's flame. The more Eliza discovered, the more the foreboding silence seemed to scream out for justice, and she knew she couldn't turn back until she had uncovered the full truth of what had happened to Aiden. The decrepit hallway stretched before Eliza like the gullet of some ancient beast, the light from her flashlight cutting through the darkness only to be swallowed by the heavy, suffocating gloom. With each step, her breath clouded in the icy air, a visible manifestation of the growing unease that knotted her stomach. The decrepitude of the surroundings was oppressive, the neglect tangible. Cracked floor tiles lay like jigsaw pieces awaiting reassembly. Lockers stood ajar, rusted hinges protesting the ghost of daily use, and ceiling tiles hung precariously, threatening to release their grip on the past. Eliza approached a classroom, its door slightly ajar, groaning on its hinges as she pushed it open. Inside, the remnants of academia were frozen in time. Desks were arranged in neat rows like soldiers in formation, now only hosting layers of dust. Sun-bleached posters clung to the walls, their colors leached out, leaving behind the ghostly images of scientific concepts. At the front of the room, the chalkboard bore the remnants of a physics problem, the numbers and letters trailing off as if the lesson had been interrupted mid-thought, an abrupt end that mirrored Aiden's own. It was then, in this tomb of knowledge, that the whisper came, a sibilant hiss that seemed to seep from the very walls. Lies, it breathed, the sound twisting in the still air. Eliza spun around, the beam from her flashlight darting across the room, catching on the edges of desks, the corners of faded educational posters, searching for the source. But there was only emptiness, the classroom devoid of life. The whispering continued, a litany of secrecy and guilt, a symphony of hushed voices that spoke of a truth smothered, a narrative rewritten to protect the guilty. It was not Aiden's voice, but it bore the message of the tragedy that had taken him. Eliza felt it in her bones, a certainty that someone within the faculty knew more than they had ever let on. A shiver ran down her spine that was not from the cold. It was the realization that she was on the cusp of uncovering a secret that had been buried within the very foundation of Hawthorne High, a secret that had cost Aiden his life. Her resolve hardened like the icy air around her. She knew that Aiden's voice had guided her here, but now it was the silence, the echoes of a concealed misdeed, that urged her forward. Eliza was no longer a mere bystander to the spectral remnants of the school's darkest hour. She was the conduit through which the light of truth would pierce the shroud of lies. With a deep breath that crystallized before her, she stepped deeper into the heart of the silence, determined to unearth the faculty's secret and give voice to the whisper that sought to expose the concealed transgressions of the past. Eliza's quest for the truth had turned her into a shadow within the very walls of Hawthorne High. Her intuition whispered that the key to the mystery lay in the actions of Mr. Clarkson, whose stoic demeanor during class belied the turbulent secrets Eliza sensed he held. By day, he was the quintessence of academic austerity, his lessons delivered with a precision that left no room for doubt or question. However, there was something in his measured steps, in the way his eyes occasionally flickered to the door leading to the old wing, that suggested an inner conflict, a narrative untold. With the stealth of a detective, Eliza positioned herself in the shadows during the long hours of the night, where the only illumination came from the pale glow of the moon filtering through the cobwebbed windows. From this vantage point, she observed Mr. Clarkson as he ventured into the place where Aiden's laughter had been extinguished. She watched the chemistry teacher's transformation as he crossed the threshold from the known to the unknown, from the present into the haunted past. The change was subtle yet undeniable. His shoulders would slump, his walk would slow, and his voice, when he spoke, was a hollow echo, filled with remorse and sorrow. Eliza held her breath, her heart pounding against her ribs, as she watched Mr. Clarkson move through the desolation of the old wing. His words were soft, meant for no living soul, as he paced the front of what used to be his classroom, stopping occasionally to lay his hand upon a desk, as if seeking the warmth of a student who would never return. I could have, he murmured to the silence, the sentences trailing off into a sigh of defeat. The darkness around her seemed to press closer as she listened, her own senses heightened to every creak and sigh of the ancient building. Clarkson's monologues were fragmented, ridden with scientific metaphors, a man trying to rationalize the irrational, to quantify his guilt. An error in judgment, he called it, a miscalculation with irreversible consequences. Night after night, Eliza gathered these pieces, each one a shard of the stained glass window that was the truth. She watched as Mr. Clarkson's hands, those of a meticulous scientist, trembled with the weight of an unseen burden. She saw him clutch at the empty air for absolution, his whispered apologies falling on the deaf ears of ghosts. Eliza felt a chill deeper than the cold air around her. There was a story here, woven into the very fabric of Hawthorne High's history, a tale of tragedy and remorse that Mr. Clarkson carried with him. It was a tale that she was determined to piece together, to bring to light the sequence of events that had led to Aiden's untimely end. Her resolve was steel. She would follow this path to its end, no matter how daunting the journey. With each of Mr. Clarkson's nocturnal confessions, Eliza felt the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, and she knew that soon the full picture of Aiden's story would emerge from the shadows of the past. She just needed to connect the dots, to find the linchpin that would unlock Mr. Clarkson's vault of secrets and bring closure to a soul that had been wandering the halls of Hawthorne High for far too long. The hallowed halls of Hawthorne High whispered with secrets, but as Eliza Thornberry's investigation intensified, those whispers grew into screams. Lockers clanged shut with the fury of an unseen tempest. Flickering fluorescent lights cast sinister shadows that seemed to chase her, and the once benign atmosphere of the school became charged with a palpable malice. Eliza felt as though the very foundations of the institution were aligning against her. Each new piece of evidence unearthed met with greater resistance, as if the school itself was a guardian of the grim secret it held. With every step she took, Aiden's spectral presence became more insistent, his ethereal form gaining substance, as if drawn into strength by her relentless pursuit of the truth. His once vague outlines now bore the sharpness of reality, his face etched with an urgency that transcended death. In a moment of supernatural clarity, he led Eliza to the heart of the enigma, the hidden laboratory where his ambitions and dreams had been cruelly snuffed out in what was made to look like a student's tragic misstep. The lab was a time capsule of horror, untouched since the day of the incident, preserved under a veneer of cobwebs and dust. Beakers lay shattered, a testament to the chaos of that fateful experiment, and the air hung heavy with the acrid scent of chemicals long since evaporated. The blackened remains of an experiment gone awry still clung to the safety shower and the fume hood, the latter bearing the ghostly outline of a handprint. It was as if the very walls of this forsaken place were screaming out in silent testimony to the dark events that had transpired. Aiden's ghost hovered over the spot where he had last stood in life, his eyes imploring Eliza to give voice to the silent scream that was his untimely demise. He conveyed the urgency of his need for justice through whispers that were felt rather than heard, his hand pointing to the concealed evidence that had been overlooked in the initial chaos, hints of tampering, of deliberate sabotage that had been dismissed or ignored by those too eager to close the case. Eliza, armed with the resolve that only the righteous can muster, knew that this silent witness to a young life stolen required her to speak. Aiden's story was etched into the very fabric of this hidden lab, each piece of evidence a syllable in the unspeakable sentence that had ended his journey so abruptly. But evidence alone was mute. It needed a living advocate, a voice that could carry its truth beyond the spectral plane and into the realm of the living. With a mixture of fear and determination, Eliza documented every discrepancy, every inconsistency with a meticulousness that would have made Aiden proud. She captured images of the lab, the handprint, the remnants of the experiment, piecing together the narrative that Aiden could no longer tell. Her nights became a marathon of research, her days a blur of compiling reports, reaching out to experts, and preparing the case that would posthumously exonerate Aiden and indict his true nemesis. The chilling revelation of Aiden's final moments was no longer a silent echo in the abandoned lab. It was a clarion call that Eliza Thornberry would not, ignore. She carried it with her, a solemn vow to the boy who had died too young, to bring the truth to light and to ensure that justice, though long delayed, would not be denied. Eliza Thornberry's quest for truth became an obsession as she delved into the heart of Hawthorne High's darkness. Her discovery of Aiden's lab journal was a breakthrough. Its worn pages held more than the innocuous scribbles of school experiments. They were the muted whispers of a darker narrative, a breadcrumb trail leading to the day that forever altered the course of many lives. Each entry was meticulously dated, the handwriting a testament to Aiden's meticulous nature, his passion for science evident in the detailed descriptions of his work. But as the dates edged closer to his final entry, the tone shifted. The once neat script began to sprawl across the pages, the content tinged with an undercurrent of anxiety and trepidation. It was as though Aiden had sensed the impending catastrophe, his words coded with the foreboding of someone standing on the precipice of their own demise. The entries became cryptic, allusions to a breakthrough that would change everything. Mentions of late-night sessions after school, of a growing camaraderie with Mr. Clarkson, who had taken a special interest in his talented pupil's project. There were gaps in the journal where days, even weeks, went unaccounted for, silent voids that Eliza felt compelled to fill. Eliza pored over each word, each hesitant stroke of the pen, trying to decipher the hidden messages that Aiden had left behind. Her room became a command center, plastered with photocopies of the journal's pages, timelines charting Aiden's progress, and photographs of the old science wing and the hidden laboratory. She cross-referenced the journal with old school records, newspaper clippings, and interviews from those who remembered Aiden, each new piece of evidence adding to the picture of a tragedy that was no mere mishap. The final entry was a chilling forecast of doom, Aiden's excitement palpable as he detailed the preparation for the experiment that promised to be his crowning achievement. There was no conclusion, no results, just an abrupt end, as if the pen had been snatched from his hand. That silence in the narrative screamed louder than any words could, and Eliza felt a cold dread settle over her as she realized the full extent of what had happened. Aiden had been on the cusp of something monumental. something that had caught Mr. Clarkson's eye, perhaps too keenly. The journal didn't spell it out, but the implication was clear. The experiment that took Aiden's life was no accident. It was the culmination of a series of calculated moves by a man who was once a mentor, now turned predator, his sanity fraying at the edges as he grappled with his own demons. Eliza knew that Aiden's trust in Mr. Clarkson had been his undoing. The pages of the journal were not just a record of scientific pursuit, but a narrative of betrayal. With a heavy heart but a fierce resolve, Eliza gathered the fragmented testimonies Aiden had left behind. She would piece them together, give voice to the silent story, and expose the treachery that lurked behind the facade of a trusted educator. It was a daunting path, but for Aiden and the truth that needed to see the light of day, she would walk it to the end. Under the flickering fluorescent lights of the musty, disused laboratory, the showdown between Eliza Thornberry and Mr. Clarkson unfolded, with a tension that could slice through the thick, stagnant air. She stood defiant, her resolve steeled by the justice she sought for Aiden, her figure casting long, resolute shadows across the cluttered room filled with relics of past academia. Eliza had arranged the evidence meticulously on the aged lab table: Aiden's journal, the photocopies of emails, the shadowy photographs taken from security footage, and her own detailed notes. Each piece was a damning link in the chain she wrapped around Mr. Clarkson's alibi, a once impenetrable armor now dented and damaged by the truth. Mr. Clarkson, a figure once revered within the halls of Hawthorne High, now stood diminished before the gathered proofs of his malevolence. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm demeanor he tried to project. His eyes, once the stern windows into a disciplined soul, now flickered with the guilt of his crimes. As Eliza spoke, her voice was calm but carried an edge sharpened by the ghosts of the injustice. She recounted Aiden's final days, the excitement he had felt about an experiment that promised to be groundbreaking, and how that very experiment had been his end. She painted a vivid picture of the betrayal, how Aiden had inadvertently uncovered evidence of Mr. Clarkson's illicit activities, illegal experiments and sales that would have scandalized the school and ended Clarkson's career. At first, Mr. Clarkson attempted to weave a narrative of denial, his words twisting and turning in a futile effort to escape the web that was closing in on him. But the evidence was irrefutable. The silence that followed his faltering denial was heavy, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked under the burden of his confession. He recounted the fateful day, his description of the event spilling out in a chaotic mix of self-pity and remorse. Aiden had confronted him, youthful idealism pitted against Clarkson's desperate pragmatism. In a moment of panicked madness to silence Aiden and preserve his own secrets, Clarkson had engineered the lab accident that would claim the boy's life. It was supposed to be a small fire, enough to scare, to intimidate, but it had spiraled out of control, consuming Aiden and the evidence of Clarkson's wrongdoing in chemical flames. Eliza, recording every word, felt a hollow victory. The confession, while it would bring justice for Aiden, was a dark reminder of the vulnerabilities of trust and the depths to which fear could drive a man. As she signaled to the authorities, who had been waiting for her signal, she knew that this was not just the end of a mystery, but the unraveling of a man's soul, laid bare in the flickering light of a haunted science wing. The hallways of Hawthorne High, once a cacophony of adolescent energy, fell silent as the news of Mr. Clarkson's confession spread. Students and teachers alike were swept into a somber reflection on the injustice that had lurked beneath the surface of their everyday lives. As the truth came to light, Eliza felt a profound shift in the school's atmosphere, a cleansing of the oppressive pall that had hung over it since Aiden's untimely death. In the following weeks, the entire town was gripped by the unfolding drama of the reopened case. The local papers were awash with headlines recounting the tragedy, painting a picture of a bright student lost and a respected educator's fall from grace. Mr. Clarkson, once a pillar of the community, was now the subject of whispered speculations and outright condemnation. The investigation was thorough, leaving no stone unturned. The chemistry lab, the silent witness to Aiden's last breath, was combed for further evidence. the law's meticulous hand peeled back layers of Mr. Clarkson's life, revealing the corruption that had festered unnoticed for years. Amidst this turmoil, Eliza stood as a beacon of justice. Her bravery was lauded by her peers, her name synonymous with courage. Yet, she carried the experience with a somber grace, aware of the cost at which it came. When the time came for Aidan to move on, Eliza met him once more in the quiet sanctuary of the library. The spectral boy who had haunted the halls of Hawthorne High was no longer a figure of restless shadows. Instead, there was a softness to his edges, a lightness to his form that hadn't been there before. He seemed almost whole, the tattered remnants of his school uniform replaced by an ethereal glow that spoke of peace. Their eyes met, and without words, a mutual understanding passed between them. Aidan's voice, now clear and free of the echo of death, thanked her. He spoke of moving on, of light and warmth awaiting him, of the end of his earthly wanderings. Eliza, her own heart heavy yet uplifted, smiled through the tears that filled her eyes. Their goodbye was a silent exchange, a nod, and a smile. And then Aidan was gone. The light that had filled the room dimmed to the afternoon sunshine filtering in through the dusty windows. In the aftermath, as Eliza walked the now peaceful corridors, she felt a certain kinship with the old building. The secrets it had held were now laid bare, allowing both the school and its inhabitants to heal and look forward. Aidan's legacy would live on, not as a cautionary tale of a life cut short, but as a catalyst for change, ensuring that such darkness would never again go unnoticed within these walls. Eliza's role in bringing the truth to light would be remembered, but she hoped, in time, it would be a distant memory. A testament to the fact that Hawthorne High had moved on from its haunted past to a hopeful future.